All right, it's 12:02, so we're going to go ahead and get started. Welcome, everybody. My name's Britt Copeland. I'm a 4-H and youth educator, 4-H and A&R educator from Jefferson County. Our other presenters today are Jill Richards. She's an A&R and 4-H educator from Ohio County. She can wave if you want to. And then we have Miranda Edge, a A&R educator from Harrison County. So welcome to the Southeastern Indiana Animal Science Lunch and Learn. Today we're going to be talking about forage sampling and analyses. So if you'd like to, just for us to get to know you a little bit better, there is a chat feature. It should be at the bottom of your screen and look like a little chat box. You can hit that and enter in what kind of animals you're looking to learn more about forage sampling for, whether it's cattle, sheep, goats, horses, and that'll help us tailor our presentation to you. So real quickly, we're going to go through sampling techniques, how to actually collect the samples for a forage analysis, reading those results and applying those results to your herd. So I'm going to turn it over to Miss Miranda Edge, and she's going to get us started.
Okay, thank you. All right, so I just wanted to kind of give you a minute to put in the chat box what types of animals we're looking at so that we can maybe have a little bit better idea of our discussion today. But while you're doing that, I wanted to start by showing you a couple of the equipment available from our extension offices. We had the opportunity to receive the manual hay probe in several counties across the state a couple of years ago. And so I know Jill has that as an option. I have one of those as well. And you may find that county educators in other counties will have that in their office and available to rent out and use. Another option is the Penn State, which that probe is one that can adjust and be fitted into a drill. A little bit easier to use. I like that one personally better. I have both of those in the office. And you may find that you're able to purchase that yourself if you're doing many forage samples a year, which is what we hope to see happen moving forward and as you understand how to use those analysis. Okay, Britt, next page. And I see that we've got beef cattle, meat goats, and horses. So a little bit different, but you're going to use the same, maybe use the same analysis for all of those animals, just look at the different requirements to help them out. So a lot of our samples or scenarios today are with beef cattle, but it's pretty easy to move those into other species later on. So hopefully this video works, but this kind of gives you an idea of the proper way to collect a sample. Round bales, you'll go in actually on both a round and a square bale. You would go in through the side so that you get a sample of all layers, knowing that that's coming from across the field. And you'll want to sample several bales within that set, whether that's a field, a cutting, however you're feeding and managing your herds, that's the sample set that you're going to come from. So in this instance from the video, this particular person had 10 acres that we were sampling. And so within that 10 acres, we took 10 bales from across the field to take our sample and fill our bag. And then that will be sent off to the lab for analysis. Next slide. So the most important values that we're looking at is a set of basic levels of moisture, dry matter, protein, fat, ash, ADF, and those are the dietary fibers and soluble versus insoluble lignins, available proteins, the adjusted crude proteins, and our TDN values, the energy values in NEL, NEM, NEG, which seems a little confusing, but it's on the lactation, maintenance, and gain values for the animal. Relative feeding values, RFQ, DE is our another energy value, ME metabolizable energy, that calcium, phosphorus, magnesium, potassium, and sulfur are minerals that come in such of a basic test. I prefer using SureTech laboratories. They're easy to work with, and it's simple to fill out their request page for the reports. The reports are basic and pretty easy to follow, but there are several different labs available. For horse owners, if you're interested in more of a looking at the sugar content or the total carbohydrates, there are specific equine labs that will give you extra testing options for that soluble protein or soluble carbohydrates so that you can manage maybe a metabolic disease horse that you've got on your farm. Okay, next slide, please. So is that basic test enough? And Jill's going to go through a little bit more on this, but we need to know, do we really need to know all those mineral values? It depends. If you know that you have a deficiency and you're looking to make sure that you're fulfilling the requirements of your animal, yes, we may need to look at those. But for the most part, we're looking at a common value of phosphorus, magnesium, zinc, copper, and selenium. And we know in this area of the country, we are low in selenium. And so that's something we look at as well. Feeding a common salt mineral mix is the simplest approach to manage those deficiencies, but you can use your other values from your feed analysis to help fulfill those needs. Also consulting a nutritionist. Some of us in Extension do have a nutrition background, and so we can help you. And if we can't, we'll certainly have available contacts that can help you with those nutrition needs. Okay, next slide. And Jill, go ahead. I think I took one of your slides, sorry.
Well,
Britt's going to cover this one.
took my slide, but that's all right.
I apologize.
You want me to go for it, Jill?
Take it away, Britt.
All right. So looking at a feed analysis form can be kind of intimidating. There are a lot of different words, and ag, they love their abbreviations. If they can make it more complicated by just using letters, they'll do it. So we're going to break that down for you and how that actually looks. So this is the different test packages from SureTech Laboratories. And as Miranda Edge summarized earlier, the most basic one that most producers will be interested in is the Forage Basic. So that's going to look at your most important stuff on a feed analysis. So that's your moisture, how much water is in your hay. You don't want it too wet because it could catch fire, and you don't want it too dry because it'll get brittle, and that will cause your animal not to eat it. The dry matter, how much crude protein is in it, and the fiber values. So there's an acid detergent fiber, which that it deals with how digestible something is. So are they going to actually get the nutrients when they eat that, or is it just passing through them? And then neutral detergent fiber, and that's going to take into consideration the intake. So how much are they actually going to eat of that? And you can get that all from the Forage Basic package. The main difference between something like the basic and the complete package is the mineral sampling. When you're looking at a complete package, you're going to get a lot more answers about what kind of minerals are in your forage. There are macro and micro minerals that your different animals want. and need, and that can all change depending on your operation. So if you're going into breeding season with cattle, for example, calcium and phosphorus are going to be two of your most needed macro minerals during that time. And again, that can be supplemented with a mineral block or a mineral mix that you can put out free choice for your herds. But looking at those minerals on your test gives you a good indication on what's actually getting taken up by your forage and what's being digested by your herd. So there can be mineral deficiencies, and that's something that you'll want to watch out for. And you can also have too many minerals. So when you look at what kind of feedstuffs you're feeding, you want to really be careful about that. Different feedstuffs have very different mineral compositions. So if you're doing a total mixed ration, or you're using a feedstuff that you're not necessarily familiar with, so maybe you're starting to use corn byproducts, maybe a complete package would be a good idea to use. There's also different specials. I circled the beef special, but there's also an equine basic on here, and that's going to do extra tests. I think the extra test for equine is the non-soluble sugar content. So you can see the little dot there where that's chosen. And your extension educator can help you determine what's best for you, what test will give you the most bang for the buck, or where you can save a few dollars. This is what the front of the form looks like. When you're filling it out, you'll want to list each individual sample that is unique. The species, what kind of animal you're feeding, and then the sample type. Is it hay? Is it haylage? Is it baleage? That type of thing. And then anything else that you can put on there. So is it wheat? Is it alfalfa? That type of thing. When you're getting a sample, you want to make sure that it's representative. So if you're feeding one whole lot, you'll want to make that one sample. So maybe take 20 different core samples from 20 different bales on the same lot, and then put that into one plastic baggie and ship it off. It's recommended for this lab that you send at least a pound, 500 grams for silage, and a little bit more for, well, and 150 grams for hay, obviously, because hay is a lot lighter. When we say a representative sample, if you're feeding from all one lot, you'll want to do samples from from 20 different bales in that lot. But if you have different feedstuff types, you'll want to do several different samples. So you wouldn't mix loose hay and haylage, for example. And if there's a significant difference between your first cutting and your last cutting, you definitely want to do 2 different samples on that. Okay. So how do you read the report? I'm going to turn it over to Jill for the hard questions.
Thanks, Britt. I don't know if they're going to be hard questions or not, but you did touch on making sure that you get samples from multiple different fields or different time cuttings and things like that. And that can be really important, especially with us living in Indiana and the weather being different and how the forages grow and the nutrient levels in each of the forages as you cut them. And I just wanted to point out that just kind of as an eye-opener that usually happens quite a bit is if you feed a poor forage without any supplements for a month, you can change that animal's body condition score dramatically and go down a full dramatic score. So if your cows or whatever sitting where they should be in the middle of the range, just know that if you're not testing your forages, it can dramatically change. And if it's close to calving season or something like that, that can be detrimental. So before we got into our nutrients, I wanted to make sure how important it is to get those forages tested. Just because you tested them last year doesn't mean that it's going to be the same this year. I found that that's kind of a misconception that several of our producers here locally think that, oh, well, I had it all tested last year and we cut it pretty much about the same. So, and it's like, well, that doesn't mean it's the same. So that $16 to SureTech Labs is well worth it when you're thinking about trying to buy feed or supplements to get your animals back up to where they should be. So that's kind of why we did that. Another thing to remember when we keep saying SureTech Labs, and that's just because their basic covers a lot more of the nutrients that you're going to want to look at, where some of the basics of other labs may not cover all of those. So it doesn't mean that you have to use that lab, but whatever lab you do use, make sure that you know what the results are going to be. So if you're paying for basic, go ahead and look and see exactly what that's going to cover in the testing. You don't want it to just be the crude protein levels. You want all the macro and micronutrients and all of that to be listed as well. So double check what you're getting for your money before you get going. But we'll go ahead and when you get a report back, this one here is just a sample from SureTech. There's going to be 2 columns, and sometimes this confuses people. But one is on a dry matter basis, and that's just with all the water removed, and the other one is as fed. So you would think that it's, important to look at both of those, but that way you know what you're looking at as far as between dry matter and as fed. If you want to go on to the next one, we'll talk a little bit about the nutrients that you're going to be looking at. So when you're going through your analysis, you're going to see TDN, and that's the total digestible nutrients. And that's just an estimate of the energy content for the feed or the roughage. The crude protein, which is sometimes just listed as CP, and that's the total quantity of true protein and non-protein nitrogen present in the plant tissue. And you're going to want to look at the dry matter side of all of this. The ADF is the acid detergent fiber, and that's the higher that level, there's generally associated with lower digestibility. So that's a percentage of highly indigestible plant material. So those are another one of those nutrient values that you're going to want to pay attention to. NDF, the neutral detergent fiber, is the percentage of cell walls or other plant structural materials that's present. So the lower the NDF levels are generally associated with higher animal intake. So, there may not be such a great percentage there, and the animals may be taking in quite a bit of it, not really getting a lot out of it. The RFV is the relative feed value. A forage's expected intake by animal and its energy value. So that's another important value that we're going to be paying attention to. We're going to work through a couple of examples. These are, again, based mostly on beef, but can be adapted pretty quickly. If you want to go ahead and move on to the next one. I did want to put this on here. If you're just raising cattle, and this is an easy thing to look up, kind of where you want to be as far as on a percentage of TDN and crude protein for what's going to be where you're headed. So growing beef steer, if your cattle are about 450 or 650 pounds, where you need to be within those ranges. Your cows, if they're lactating or if they're dry and pregnant, you don't need as much crude protein in them, but you still need a good amount of TDN. So this is just a sample. I know we had some goats and some horses, so that's going to be a little bit different for their requirements. But this just gives you kind of an idea of where you might want to be or what range you want to be close to. And if you're not, then you need to start looking into some supplementing and doing a ration for your animals. Move ahead, Britt. So not only do you want to look at the analysis report, you want to actually get a feel for your hay. And we call that sensory analysis. And it sounds kind of crazy that you're going to go into your barn and you're going to grab a hold of your hay and feel it. Because if you look at hay that's got a pretty good report as far as on paper, but you put your hands in it and it's full of thistles, that's not going to be very good for your animals to take, especially if you're feeding horses. They're not going to touch it. So get your hands in there and see if you can identify some plants, what else is in there. And also you're going to use some more senses. There's a short video here that's going to show you the different steps, and then we can talk about it a little bit. Go ahead, Britt.
Today we're going to talk about forage analysis. Hopefully you've taken your hay sample and you've sent it in and you've got your data so you can find out what nutrients are in your hay. But today we're going to talk about sensory analysis. And this is very important when you're looking at your hay to figure out exactly what you're feeding. Your data is going to have all the results and tell you what the nutrient levels are, but if the hay isn't palatable for your livestock, they're not going to eat it. During sensory analysis, you're going to look for different plant materials, whether you're looking for grasses such as orchard grass or tall fescue, or if you're looking for legumes like alfalfa or red clover. Next, you're going to look at your hay for the leaf retention and for the maturity level. That will be another indicator of the quality of hay that you're going to feed your livestock. With your hay sample, now what you need to do is actually smell your hay sample. See how it smells, see if it's going to be appealing to your livestock. You're going to be able to smell what hay actually smells like, and hopefully you don't have a musty smell or a mold smell or anything like that. In conclusion, producers can use their sensory analysis that can help you tell a quality of hay along with your forage analysis.
All right, thanks, Britt, for showing that as we get our slides pulled back up. It's important to use that sensory analysis on top of what your papers tell you as far as nutrient content. I don't know if my computer's frozen or if you guys are just frozen. I think we're back now. All right, so with that, we're going to go into a little more in depth to look at what exactly we have as far as a sample and do a little bit of rations. Are there any questions at this time before we keep moving on? You can always put those in the chat throughout this and we'll keep checking it. You can go to the next slide, Britt. All right, I'll turn it over to Miranda.
Okay, thanks. So yes, after you've got your analysis, you've gone through and made sure that the cattle or the horses or the goats are actually going to eat it. There's not anything sticky in there or big pieces that are hard to chew and swallow. We'll look at how's it going to work for the actual animal. And so we made some assumptions here for just for this example, but you'll want to look at your calf crop or your cow herd as a whole. And knowing it's January, this part of the world, we have several people who are now calving or very close to calving. On our farm, we're about a month away from calving. So I kind of put some assumptions that I would be using right now on a mixed hay analysis that we took last year. So this would be mixed hay that we cut from last year's hay fields and then put in the barn to use now. And so we've got some pregnant replacement heifers, and they were about 8 months they were about 15 months at breeding. They're at about 18 months of gestation. So we're getting pretty close. And we're looking and expecting for a calf birth weight of about 85 pounds. So this cow, or this heifer rather, is working on growing herself as well as her calf. And so that does put a lot of extra needs into what she has to have as far as energy, proteins, and the minerals to keep all of her structures going and be healthy and stay in that good body condition score through maybe cold winter. Our cows are on grass with hay supplement. Now, of course, there's not a whole lot of grass out there. They're still trying to pick up a little bit. We've had a fairly mild winter, so they've got some to still graze on. So we're going to expect that they're going to have some of that with their hay supplement of this mixed grass hay. And normally in January, it could be cold. You could have rain. You could have freezing rain, ice, all sorts of different weather. So it's a little harder on them for body temperature and things like that. But let's look at one particular value that you will get out of your analysis. We didn't really talk about this in our definitions, but the energy value is a good start. It's kind of a rule of thumb that I learned in my nutrition classes, is to start on the energy values and then make sure everything else fits. So I pulled the energy requirements for this pregnant replacement heifer at 8 months gestation and looked at her requirements for maintenance, growth, and pregnancy. And so these values are in megacalories per day, and she requires a total of 13.23 megacalories per day for her basic body maintenance, the growth of her body, as well as her gestation needs during pregnancy. Looking back at our mixed hay results, remember that we had the dry matter values versus as fed. So I'm pulling just that dry matter value out to do these calculations. As fed is important to know, but when you're doing these calculations, that dry matter value is the important values to have. So we're looking here, this one has a result of 12.8% crude protein. We think of that as a pretty decent hay. I prefer something maybe a little bit higher, but sometimes you don't get that. And so like Jill said, every year's a little different. And I can give a story that 2 years ago, our hay crops were at 13% crude protein. We were pretty happy with that. Made some really nice hay for the winter. We didn't worry about body condition scores. We had loose mineral out. They maintained. They looked great. Calves looked great. We didn't have any problems. Then the next year, we had a really, really dry winter. We had a very, very wet spring and a really, really dry June. So our crude protein values went down drastically. They were actually at 10% in some of our hay on first cutting. And so now we're looking at a drop in that crude protein, which means there's a drop in the energy available for that animal. And we're going to have to redo our calculations to make sure that we still have a hay that will bring the nutrients that this animal needs during her pregnancy, during lactation, during growth, or whatever we're using that hay for, whatever animal growth stage, production stage they are in. So, okay, Britt, let's go to the next page. And we're going to look at some calculations. And so you can get your calculator out, but I've kind of done some of these for you. Use your analysis if you've got one already, and think about how this might work for your own particular feed analysis or forage analysis. So our mixed hay has 0.58 megacalories per pound, and that is our starting calculations. Our cow needs 13.23 megacals per day. So she must eat enough of this hay to get that energy density. There is a maximum amount of hay or forage that they will eat in a day, and that's about 2 to 2.5% of her body weight. So to make the calculations somewhat easy, we stuck with a 2% of her body weight. She's probably a little bit more full, uncomfortable, and not as much room to add that extra 0.5% in anyways. And so that's probably where we're going to see a 8-month gestation point of a heifer at this time. Went back our assumption on the size of this animal when she is fully grown, maybe not necessarily now, but at fully grown, she's going to be 1,200 pounds. That's our estimation. And we multiply that by the 2%, and that gives us a value of 23.5 pounds of forage feed, everything she'll eat in a day. So within that 23.5 pounds, she's eating grass and hay. We're going to assume a lot of that's going to be hay since there's minimal grass out there. And I'm going to calculate that mixed hay value of 0.58 megacals per pound to the total pounds she will eat in a day to find that it will bring her or give her 13.6 megacals per day. And so if we check that against her needs, yep, that works. It is greater than the 13.23 megacals that she needs per day. Go ahead, Britt, you can go forward. All right, we're good. And next one. But we said it's January. That's a pretty close value to what her needs are. And we might find that if it's really cold, really windy, the ground's frozen, it's harder for her to walk. There's mud around the hay feeder, so it's getting harder for her to move in and get in to get that hay. And maybe she's not a thick-hided animal, depending on the breeding that you have. Those all are major factors that are going to change the needs of that animal. And there's extra coefficients and calculations that we can add in to find that exact amount, and nutritionists know how to do that. This is showing you just a really basic math problem that you can use at home, just to give you an idea. Using those factors to think about how she might need that temperature wind to get around the mud and slopping through that, maybe staying a little colder, and how that might affect her ability to stay warm, use that energy value is pretty important to think about. So at this point, with that mixed grass hay, I might decide that we're going to put a creep feeder out. If she's going to be a smaller frame score than my full-grown cows, we can set that creep feeder out so that our heifers can get in and maybe grab a little bit extra grain to make sure that they've got the energy needs that they want or need for their growth again, their fetus growth, and then their body maintenance scores. And if you want to correlate that into a goat, lamb, horse, they're all going to have their basic needs. And so this little lamb here on the screen has his basic needs. His mom is now lactating. Her basic needs of like crude protein has maybe gone up a little bit. And that energy value has probably exponentially grown because she's pushing a lot of energy into creating that milk, as well as holding her body weight. And so we may see body condition scores of our mother animals go down a little bit during lactation. And that's something to definitely watch. A little bit of body condition score change is not bad. We'll do more next. So I won't get into detail, but watching that and maintaining that and giving that supplemental feed to maybe bring up that a total available energy value or crude protein value, calcium, phosphorus, whatever you're looking at, to make sure that it meets their requirements in the different factors and assumptions that you need to make for your herd. Okay, and that is a lot of information in a little bit of time. And so I just did the one calculation. Again, like I said, you can take any dry matter value on that analysis, look at the requirement for the animal, and do the same calculations. So at this point, does anybody have any questions about that particular piece? Because that was a lot of information in a short amount of time. And we'll just give you a couple of minutes to share. And this is kind of the end of our presentation anyway. So as host, Britt, if you want to say anything more, I think we would be welcome to opening the chat, or if you'd like to unmute yourself to ask a question, feel free to. But this gives you a basic knowledge of how to read your sample and how to use that for your particular herd model.
I'm not seeing anything in the chat. Our contact information is here. Our next Lunch and Learn is February 4th. We're doing body conditioning scoring. And as always, if you have any questions about this presentation, you want to ask them later, you can always reach out to your local extension office, and they'll help you through it.